Welcome back. Yesterday, this was a big deal. Federal prosecutors, it's kind of a big deal and not a big deal, and let me explain to you why. Federal prosecutors in New York yesterday announced that the operators of this global online currency exchange, it was kind of like a PayPal run out of Costa Rica or something, that they were actually running a $6 billion money laundering operation, which acted as a central hub for criminals trafficking and everything from child porn to identity theft. And over a period of 7 years, Liberty Reserve, it's one of those wonderful names. Can you imagine if they got that before the IRS looking for 501c4 status? Hey, we're Liberty Reserve. That's probably why they went 7 years and nobody took a second look at them. Oh, they must be a Tea Party group. Don't touch them. Can't you see the Obama administration? Don't be afraid. Be very afraid. Don't go near them. They will criticize us. Anyhow, over a period of 7 years, Liberty Reserve conducted more than 55 million transactions for millions of customers around the world, including 200,000 customers here in the U.S. So last Friday, officials in Spain arrested Liberty Reserve founder Arthur Badovsky, who's among 7 people arrested and charged in the case. So all those charged face counts of conspiracy to commit money laundering, conspiracy to operate an unlicensed money transmitting business, and operating an unlicensed money transmitting business. So it looks like those responsible for the biggest online cyber money laundering case in history are going to be held criminally accountable for their actions. Da-da-da! Great news, right? $6 billion, $9 billion, an enormous amount of money that they were money laundering. This is a terrible thing. If only we could say the same thing for the real big money launderers, like HSBC. Back in December last year, the Department of Justice, the U.S. Treasury, announced that HSBC, the world's largest bank, the second largest bank in the United States, had laundered money for some of the most notorious international drug cartels in the world, while also illegally conducting transactions on behalf of terrorists and customers in Iran, Libya, Cuba, Sudan, and Burma. Between 2006 and 2009, according to federal officials, HSBC, here's the phrase, failed to monitor. This is what they call money laundering. You didn't notice that was the mafia giving money to the drug lords. Anyhow, failed to monitor a staggering $670 billion in wire transfers and an additional $9.4 billion in cash transactions from its operations in Mexico. Let me get this straight. If I walk into the bank or you walk into the bank and say, I got some money in your bank and I'd like $5,000, please, in cash, they are required to call the FBI. Anything over $5,000, it used to be over $10,000. Now it's over $5,000. They got to call the Department of Homeland Security and say, hey, this Hartmann guy wants $5,000 out of his bank account in cash. HSBC, not so much. As a result, according to officials, at least $881 million in drug trafficking money, same $5,000, including money from the Sinaloa cartel of Mexico and the Norte de Valle cartel of Colombia, was laundered by this big bank. The Department of Justice also said that HSBC helped process $660 million in illegal transactions. Illegal is supposed to mean something, right? From Iran, Cuba, Sudan, Libya, and Burma by intentionally hiding the identity of the countries. When they first held the news conference announcing the bust, Assistant U.S. Attorney General Lanny Breuer said, and I quote, HSBC is being held accountable for stunning failures of oversight. The record of dysfunction that prevailed at HSBC for many years was astonishing. End of quote. He's going to hold them accountable, right? But what does being held accountable really mean? Does it mean sending banksters who helped perpetrate a bloody drug war and laundered billions for drug kingpins to jail? No. Being held accountable means that they signed what's called a deferred prosecution agreement, a DPA, with the Department of Justice, under which no criminal charges will be brought against the bank or any of their banksters as long as they meet certain conditions. Those conditions include paying a $1.9 billion fine. Did I mention this was a $600 billion operation? despite laundering hundreds of billions of dollars illegally, dealing with some of the world's most nefarious drug cartels, allegedly laundering money for terrorist groups, and moving money for customers in nations that the U.S. has no diplomatic ties with, HSBC got off with a slap on the wrist from the DOJ. Even Republicans, well, maybe especially Republicans, because this is a Democratic administration. I mean, this is the Bush or the Obama DOJ, found the notion of HSBC getting off with what amounts to a slap on the wrist, despite blatantly criminal behavior. Even Republicans found that appalling. Chuck Grassley, Republicans are perennial Republican. Back when the settlement was first announced, he said, the DOJ, this is inexcusable that they had not brought criminal prosecutions against the bank. In fact, he wrote a letter to AG Eric Holder. He said, what I have seen from the Department of Justice is an inexplicable unwillingness to prosecute and convict those responsible for aiding and abetting drug lords and terrorists. I cannot help but agree with an editorial in the New York Times that the government has bought into the notion that too big to fail is too big to jail. Now, the maybe good news is that the HSBC slap on the wrist agreement with the DOJ appears to have stalled out. Judge John Gleeson, who's overseeing the case, is now believed to be considering rejecting the so-called settlement and deferred prosecution agreement, which could open up HSBC to criminal prosecution and maybe even losing their charter to do business in the U.S. But if history is any indicator, don't hold your breath. Regardless of whether Judge Gleeson rejects the deal, how is it? How did we get here? That a big bank, a multi-trillion-dollar bank that launders hundreds of billions of dollars for criminals, hasn't seen a single perp walk. But an online company can have its CEO arrested and prosecuted along with a bunch of other executives. Well, the reason why Liberty Reserve is going to jail and HSBC isn't is because Liberty Reserve is not a real bank. If it's not a real bank, then its employees and its CEO are not real banksters. Banksters are protected. They're a protected species. They're not an endangered species. They're a protected species. And since the Liberty Mutual guys are not banksters, they can hide behind hide behind the millions of dollars in contributions to American politicians that American banksters have been passing out. Since the executives at Liberty Reserve were not the anointed elite of the Jamie Dimons and the Lloyd Blankfeins of the world, they're going to face the full force of the American criminal justice system. Or at least one of them. I mean, right now we have two criminal justice systems in America. One for the wealthy elite, the corporations and the big banks, and a second one for everybody else. And thanks to this double standard, corporations like Walmart that dump toxic waste get off with a fine, but if you or I, an actual person, did the same thing, we'd be facing years in jail. 5 to 15, to be specific. It's time to end this double standard. Big corporations, big banks, they need to be held accountable for their actions just like everyone else. And banksters who launder money for drug cartels in hostile foreign nations need to be facing jail time, not just a slap on the wrist. Back in the 80s, after Reagan deregulated the S&Ls and they predictably went on a binge of illegal activity and then collapsed, Reagan investigated and prosecuted over 1,000 banksters and sent several hundred of them to jail. The most famous was Charles Keating, who went to jail even though he'd been giving huge payoffs to the infamous Keating 5 senators, including John McCain. You know, if Reagan could send politically connected banksters to jail, Obama can do it too. Time to let some potheads out of prison, but keep the cells warm for the banksters. 15 minutes past there.